The neighborhood had always carried an illusion of order, a neat and polished surface that looked perfect to any outsider driving through. Freshly trimmed hedges lined every walkway, fences stayed uniformly painted, and every house looked like it had been copied from the one before it. But beneath that curated perfection, there existed a layer of tension residents rarely spoke about openly. The HOA board held power that stretched far beyond landscaping rules, and people whispered about old disputes, strange fines, and cases where homeowners were pressured into silence. Most shrugged it off as exaggerated gossip. I used to be one of them. Until the day I discovered something the HOA desperately wanted to hide. It began with something small, almost too small to notice. A faint hum in the walls of my home at night, a vibration that came and went like a heartbeat. At first, I blamed old wiring or maybe a loose transformer down the street. But as days passed, the sound grew stronger, more rhythmic, more intentional. It seemed to run beneath my floors, through the foundation, and pulse into the quiet hours when everyone else was asleep. My curiosity turned into unease, and unease into suspicion. One night, when the sound was at its strongest, I followed it out to the backyard. The ground felt warm under my feet, warmer than it should have in the chilled air. That was when I noticed a hairline crack spreading across the concrete patio, a crack that hadn't existed a week earlier. The vibration seemed to radiate directly from beneath it. I crouched down, pressing my palm against the cement, and felt a subtle but steady thrum, like machinery, buried deep below. The next day, when I mentioned it casually to a neighbor, her expression shifted from concern to something bordering fear. She lowered her voice and warned me not to dig too much into things, especially things related to infrastructure. She wouldn't explain why. The conversation left me unsettled. Something wasn't right. So I did what any responsible homeowner would, I submitted a formal complaint to the HOA. The issue wasn't cosmetic, it could be structural, even dangerous. I attached photos, described the vibration, and asked for an inspection. Their automated system confirmed my complaint was received, processed, and scheduled for review. I waited for a response. I expected a reply within a week. Instead, nothing happened. Not a single acknowledgement from the board. The vibration grew stronger, the crack widened, and my frustration turned into suspicion. When I logged back into the HOA portal, the record of my complaint had disappeared entirely. No history. No ticket number. No trace. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch. But when I called the HOA office, the receptionist insisted no complaint had ever been submitted under my name. She even implied I might be confused, as if I imagined the whole thing. Then she politely redirected me off the call. The tone in her voice suggested something rehearsed, like she had said the same line many times before. Their denial wasn't just frustrating. It was alarming. I decided to push further, so I went to the HOA office in person. The moment I stepped inside, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations halted, eyes tracked me, and the board members sitting at a long table stiffened. It felt like I had walked into a space where I wasn't supposed to be. When I asked again about my complaint, they responded with practiced politeness, layered over cold detachment. They repeated the same lines: no complaint on record, no issues known, no reason for me to worry. Over the next few days, small signs of surveillance began appearing around my property. An unmarked SUV parked across the street for hours at a time. HOA volunteers walking unusually close to my windows during routine inspections. A board member lingering at the end of the driveway as if waiting for me to leave. And every night, the vibration continued beneath my home. I started researching property maps, city infrastructure layouts, anything that might explain the underground activity. That's when I noticed something strange. Public records showed a sealed section of utilities running directly beneath the neighborhood, a section marked off decades ago, long before the HOA even existed. It shouldn't have been in use. It shouldn't have been connected to anything. And yet something beneath my home was active. The crack in the concrete grew wider. My patio began to sink ever so slightly, forming a shallow tilt toward the center. The hum vibrated through the soles of my feet, steady and mechanical, like a machine no one had told us about. The HOA's silence turned into something darker, avoidance mixed with fear. Late one night, unable to sleep, I decided to record the vibration from outside. As I stepped onto the patio, the sound pulsed harder than ever, as if reacting to my presence. I kneeled down, placing my ear closer to the crack, and that was when I finally heard it, something beneath the cement that wasn't just mechanical. A sound too rhythmic, too deliberate. Like breathing. The realization hit me with a cold rush: whatever was under the neighborhood wasn't just a machine. It was something alive or something pretending to be. I stood up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw movement at the edge of my yard. A flashlight beam flicked off quickly, followed by the quiet shuffle of footsteps retreating. Someone had been watching me, perhaps waiting for me to discover too much. The next morning, a letter appeared on my doorstep. No envelope, no signature, no HOA logo. Just a single sheet of paper with one line. Stop digging. No threat. No warning. Just an order. But it told me everything. The HOA knew about the underground activity. They knew about the vibration. They knew about the crack. And they were desperate to keep it hidden. And more importantly, my complaint hadn't been lost. It had been buried. But they forgot one terrifying detail. The vibration was getting stronger every single day. The morning after the anonymous warning, everything in the neighborhood felt sharper, like the world had shifted in some small but crucial way. The hedges that once looked perfectly trimmed now stood like silent guards. The stillness of the streets felt manufactured, as if the entire place had been placed under an invisible dome. Even the neighbors' eyes seemed different, watchful, nervous, and avoiding mine. But the vibration beneath my home didn't care about anyone's fear. It grew stronger with each hour, pulsing steadily, almost eagerly, as though whatever was down there sensed it was no longer unnoticed. I could feel it now even during the day, gently shaking the floorboards under my feet and rattling small objects off the shelves. Something was waking up. I knew the HOA had buried my complaint on purpose. The denial, the glances, the sudden surveillance, none of it was coincidence. They were protecting something. Hiding something. And the fact that they wanted me silent meant that thing was more dangerous, more consequential, than a simple structural issue. But there was one detail they hadn't accounted for, one thing they never expected. I had copies. The night I submitted the original complaint, I took screenshots of everything: the confirmation page, the ticket number, the attached photos of the crack, even the timestamp at the bottom. I hadn't expected to need them. I took them out of habit, the same way I saved receipts or kept backup copies of important emails. But now, those screenshots were evidence the HOA couldn't erase. Evidence of their cover-up. And that meant I finally had leverage. As the day went on, a construction crew arrived 2 streets over. They wore no company logo, no identifying badges, nothing that marked them as city workers. Their trucks were plain white. They began drilling, deep, heavy drilling, right into the ground. The sound echoed across the neighborhood like a distant heartbeat syncing with the vibration under my home. I watched from my window as one of the workers glanced around nervously, keeping watch while the others operated the equipment. The HOA president stood nearby, talking to a tall man in a dark jacket. Their conversation was hurried, tense. The man kept pointing at a folder he held tightly against his chest. I couldn't see what was inside, but every time he spoke, the president's expression tightened with fear. Something wasn't just wrong. Something was escalating. By mid-afternoon, I felt the vibration shift. It wasn't just pulsing anymore, now it was moving. A slow, dragging rumble that traveled from beneath the patio toward the center of my house, as though tracing a path through the foundation. The walls trembled. A picture frame fell to the floor and cracked. My house groaned like something heavy was passing beneath it. I knew then that waiting for answers wasn't enough. I needed to find where the vibration originated. I needed to see what the HOA was trying so desperately to bury. That night, I took a flashlight and went outside. The air was colder than usual, unusually still, as though the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I crouched by the widening crack in the patio. The hum was deeper now, almost resonant, vibrating through my bones. When I placed my hand over the crack, the warmth beneath it felt stronger, more alive. The ground shifted. I stepped away quickly, but the motion had already triggered something. The vibration surged in intensity, thumping like a slow heartbeat directly beneath the slab. My porch light flickered, humming with the sudden burst of energy. And then, the ground went silent. For the first time in days, the vibration stopped completely. The sudden stillness was worse than the noise. Worse than the humming. Worse than the shaking. It felt like the air itself was holding a secret. A moment of eerie, unnatural calm spread across the yard. Then, across the street, a porch light flicked on. The same unmarked SUV that had been watching my house pulled up and parked, engine still running. Two men stepped out, both dressed in the same dark jackets I had seen earlier. They looked at my house, scanned the yard, and then split up, one walking down the side of my property, the other stopping at the end of my driveway. They were searching for something. Or someone. I ducked inside and shut off all the lights, watching them through the curtains. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They simply circled the house like predators testing a boundary. Then one of them stopped. He looked down at something on the ground, something I hadn't noticed earlier. A small, circular metal plate had surfaced near the edge of the patio, half buried in dirt. It was old, rusted, and stamped with faded numbers and a symbol I didn't recognize. A symbol that didn't match any city utility markings. The man crouched, brushed dirt away, and immediately stiffened. He whispered into his radio. Within seconds, the SUV headlights flashed twice. The men left abruptly, driving away faster than before. The neighborhood returned to its unnatural silence. But the meaning of their discovery stayed with me long after the SUV disappeared. The plate wasn't part of my house. It wasn't part of any ordinary system. It was old, older than the neighborhood, older than the HOA. It had been buried long before any of us ever lived here. And now it had surfaced. As I stared at the rusted metal through the window, a cold understanding washed over me. The HOA wasn't scared of my complaint. They were scared of what was waking up beneath us. And the vibration wasn't gone. It was waiting. The night after the metal plate surfaced felt heavier than any that came before it. The air carried a weight, a quiet density that pressed against my skin and made every sound feel sharper. Even the crickets had gone silent, leaving only the faint ringing of my own heartbeat echoing in the stillness. The vibration beneath the house did not return immediately. Instead, it settled into a long, unnatural pause, as if the thing underground was gathering strength or listening. The HOA had always acted like an administrative body, a group obsessed with paint colors, lawn heights, and fence designs. But the moment those men in unmarked jackets uncovered the plate, their entire facade cracked. They were not simply hiding something inconvenient. They were guarding something ancient, something powerful enough to make them ignore complaints, erase evidence, and monitor residents like threats. Whatever lay beneath the neighborhood was not meant to be found, not meant to be disturbed, and certainly not meant to surface. I spent the entire night awake, watching the yard from behind the darkened window. The plate sat half visible in the moonlight, its rusted edges pulsing with a faint glimmer as if reflecting something beneath it. I watched it long enough to convince myself the shimmer wasn't just the wind or my imagination. It moved with a rhythm. It pulsed. It breathed. Sometime past midnight, the ground exhaled. It came as a soft, unsettling rush of warm air rising through the cracks across the patio, carrying a scent that didn't belong anywhere near a suburban development. It smelled ancient, metallic, and faintly electric, like the ozone that follows a lightning strike. The warmth intensified, radiating outward across the yard in waves, and the vibration returned, steady at first, then building with each thrum. The HOA made their move before sunrise. 3 SUVs rolled into the street without headlights, stopping in a formation that blocked both entrances to the cul-de-sac. Men in the same dark jackets stepped out, carrying cases shaped like tools but clearly intended for something far from maintenance work. Their movements were coordinated, rushed, and driven by fear rather than control. The HOA president arrived moments later, her usually composed expression replaced with panic. She spoke to the men quickly, gesturing toward my house and the yard with wide, anxious motions. She pointed specifically at the plate. It was clear she had not slept either. Her once perfect posture had folded under the weight of something she could no longer hide. The men spread out in a strategic circle around the property, setting small devices into the soil. They resembled sensors, each one emitting a faint pulse of light as it synced with the others. A grid was forming, surrounding my house like a containment ring. Whatever they were trying to hold back was no longer theoretical. It was real, active, and threatening to break through. I watched the entire operation from the shadows inside, every breath tight in my chest. The vibration grew again, stronger, more aggressive, as if the thing underground sensed it was being trapped. The house trembled. A lamp toppled over. The floorboards groaned like strained ribs. The ground beneath the plate began to crack. Thin lines spidered outward from the metal, carving through dirt and concrete alike. The plate shook violently, rattling against the roots and stones buried beneath it. The devices planted by the men flashed brighter, sinking into a rapid strobe. Something was forcing its way upward, pushing against decades of soil and secrecy. The HOA president staggered back, covering her mouth. Her eyes were fixed on the plate with a terror that revealed everything I had suspected. She had known. She had always known. The HOA was not hiding a mistake. They were guarding a containment breach. The ground erupted. Not with dirt or steam or machinery, but with a force that felt alive. The metal plate launched upward, spinning into the air like a coin flicked by an unseen giant. The vibration burst into a soundless wave, knocking several men to their knees. The devices around the yard flickered and died instantly, their lights snuffed out like candles hit by a wind they couldn't measure. From beneath the destroyed patio, a deep red glow began to spread. It pulsed in slow, heavy beats, illuminating the cracks and casting long shadows across the yard. The glow wasn't technological. It wasn't electrical. It was organic, radiating with a heartbeat that matched the thrum I'd been feeling in my bones for days. The earth continued to split, revealing a cavernous opening lined with stone, metal, and something softer, material that looked ancient and alive at the same time. The air grew hotter, searing enough to sting my skin even from inside the house. A low, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the windows, the walls, and my chest like a deep, primordial call. The men scrambled to create a perimeter, but their fear outweighed their training. Some backed away. Others froze. A few muttered into radios that no longer worked. The HOA president collapsed to her knees, staring into the glowing fissure as though she were looking into a mirror of every decision she had tried to bury. The glow intensified, building into a blinding radiance. The ground below began to rise, as if something massive was pushing against it from below, something that had been dormant for generations, caged beneath the foundations of a manufactured neighborhood. The vibration reached its peak, shaking leaves off trees and sending stones skittering across the yard. My house rattled like a brittle shell around me. And then everything stopped. The vibration ended abruptly. The glow blinked out like someone flipping a switch. The heat dissipated. The air stilled. Even the cracks in the ground seemed to freeze mid-split. Silence flooded the neighborhood. But the silence wasn't calm. It was listening. The HOA president slowly stood, trembling, her eyes locked on the opening in the earth. The men waited, poised to run, to fight, or to collapse. I stepped closer to the window, breath caught in my throat. The earth emitted one final pulse. A single, heavy heartbeat. And then it sealed. The ground closed as suddenly as it had opened, pulling soil and stone back into place with a force that left the yard smooth except for scattered debris. The metal plate lay twisted and useless nearby. The glow was gone. The vibration vanished completely. Whatever had been waking up beneath us, had gone back to sleep. But not on its own. It had been triggered. Agitated. Aware. And now it knew we were here. The HOA president gathered the men with shaking hands, urging them back to the SUVs. They avoided looking at my house, at the ruins of my patio, at the remnants of what they had tried to contain. The SUVs sped out of the neighborhood, leaving only trails of dust behind. The entire operation, every secret plan, every attempt to bury the truth, had failed. But the story wasn't over. The vibration never returned. Not that day. Not that night. Not for weeks afterward. The neighborhood pretended everything was normal, but the residents could feel the truth humming beneath their feet. The HOA stopped acknowledging me entirely, acting as though my property didn't exist. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and the lights were off, I would place my palm against the floor and wait. And in that stillness, I would remember the one terrifying detail the HOA forgot. Things that sleep. Eventually. Wake up.